Lakeland PBS presents Common Ground, brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Production funding of Common Ground is made possible in part by First National Bank Bemidji, continuing their second century of service to the community. Member FDIC. Welcome to Common Ground. I'm producer-director Scott Knudsen. In this part 2 of our Season 11 premiere, we continue to examine the restoration of the Crow Wing County Historical Society's museum in downtown Brainerd.
This restoration was very necessary. We had water infiltration through the roof. There was glass falling out of windows. We had tuck pointing that needed to be completed. There was water infiltration through the walls coming into the gallery area of the house. Broken clay tiles on the roof that needed to be addressed. And so it was easily identified that immediate attention needed to be brought to the structural integrity of the building. The building would have continued to deteriorate and age and put the artifacts that are stored in this building at risk.
The restoration work started in the sheriff's residence with the windows. So we had to go down and take down all of the curtains and the blinds and make sure that when someone was literally removing the windows from their frames that nothing would be broken.
Restoration of the wood windows in the residence area of the house was a challenge because there was special care that needed to be taken and the number of contractors that were involved in each step. You have your general contractor to remove the window. You have your abatement specialist to abate the lead paint that was on the windows. From there it goes to your glass repair, your window repair shop. From there it goes to the painters. Then it comes back to the glass shop and eventually back to the general contractor to reinstall. So we had to work as a team to come up with a good plan on how we were going to approach restoration of these windows.
So all of the windows in the sheriff's residence were still the original windows. So to follow new standards, they kept the windows and restored them rather than replace them with new windows.
Historic restoration requires very stringent requirements through the National Secretary of the Interior. Those are required because there are a lot of examples of historic architecture and historic buildings where you can visibly see a difference between the original materials and what had been used to repair them. And really it is a shame when you have such a beautiful historic building where somebody didn't take the time to properly identify those repairs. WSN works exclusively with Todd Grover, who is one of the owners and architects at McDonald and Mack Architects. They specialize in historic preservation, and they are one of the go-to architecture firms within the state and within the nation.
So I'm an architect, and we specialize in working on historic or existing buildings. And people may think that architects may not get involved in this component of buildings and design, but it really is important.
Now I am taking this window out, and I'm attaching the weights to it on the string here. That one there, and this one here. I'm gonna put the window back in, and then put this side back together. Yeah, this window here has been restored already, so I'm just hooking these weights up to it.
And it's really important as part of this larger profession to have and maintain these existing buildings and have this specialized techniques in order to apply to these buildings, because it isn't as straightforward as sometimes working in a new building. It's a different set of problems that we need to tackle and address, and that's what we do every day.
They specialize in this. They have a very good relationship with the State Historic Preservation Office, and they were a key component and a key member to our design team. And their expertise and their ability to help with the discovery process, and then also through that communication with the State Historic Preservation Office with design solutions, was key in so many ways.
So it's not just buildings like this, a historic house or a historic museum. We also work with historic structures that may be roadside structures, or we work with churches, or we work with Main Street buildings, or we work with people who own historic homes, or even libraries. But what it means, it's a diverse program, but the connected part of it is they have a historic or an existing building that they really want to retain and preserve, and they esteem it with a high level of significance, and they want this program to work in there successfully. And so that's the fun that we have, is we get to work with all these diverse clients and work within this box of an existing building and try to solve those problems for them.
Now we got dried paint on the outside. One side's loose.
One of the elements of this building that we needed to address was the historic wood windows, and they were preserved in 1980, and they were on the sheriff's residence side or on the north side. And we worked with a local contractor, Gull Lake Glass, and they were able to actually salvage these historic wood windows, repair them. And part of that process was to remove the historic glazing, repair the windows, and then put the glazing back in. And so it was really fantastic that they were able to do that successfully. And a lot of times the historic materials are so fragile and brittle that has to be done very carefully.
Highmark Construction did a lot of our general construction work on site, and Barato Brothers out of Cross Lake was our main general contractor on site. Gull Lake Glass helped us on the windows and the glass work, and it did turn out very beautifully.
So in repairing of the historic wood windows, that involved quite a few steps. And that process included, number one, the removal of the windows. There were storm windows, and then there were the double hung windows themselves. And due to the fact that these windows are over 100 years old, that required very cautious methods and careful methods of doing that. So the replacement of the historic windows was a multi-step process, and the first step in that process was abatement. And some of the material had asbestos, and that was the glazing around the glass itself. So that was the first step in the process. The second step of the process was to remove the windows from their openings, and a lot of caution had to be provided in that. And then after they were removed, they were sent to a local contractor, Gull Lake Glass, to where the glass was removed from the window frames, and the frames were repaired. And then the glass was replaced with new glazing, and then the windows were painted, and then they were brought back on site for installation.
The roof had a sag of some kind, as far as I know. I think a lot of it was gutter problems, but water had been seeping in basically the sides of the building and coming in.
The roof had experienced many years of deterioration due to water infiltration, and so when two different roof planes come together, that creates a valley, and that's where we had identified water infiltration. So over time, when that happens and it deteriorates, the roofing tends to sag, and so there was a very visible sag in the roof. And so as part of this project, we identified that those clay tile roof tiles had to be taken off very carefully, and then we had to remove the deteriorated wood, replace that with new, and then carefully place the clay tile roofs back together. Another challenge with that process is that they had to be laid back in the same position where they were, because some of them were custom cut, because it was a valley condition, and the contractor, Brainerd Brothers Construction, did a very great job with that.
The roof on this building is made of clay tile structure. Underneath that, in one of the valleys, the roof system was sagging, and it needed to be reinforced. This required us to remove all the original clay tiles from the roof, carefully store them, and then make the repairs to the roof system and return the original clay tiles.
One of the interesting struggles with historic preservation is that you try to find materials that replicate the historic nature of the original materials. And in preparation of replacing the clay roof tiles that were damaged, we were able to locate the original company that manufactured those clay roof tiles. It turned out that we did not need to purchase any, but it was just part of the process and part of this type of project where we really had to do a thorough job researching that.
When doing a project of this historic nature, we have to take special consideration and care for the original fixtures and materials in the building. It presents challenges in not everything can just be replaced with something new. Instead, we have to take more time to restore instead of replace.
One of the specific challenges that we ran into here was, for instance, on the roof. There was an area where water had seeped into the roof and really damaged some of the structure up there. And so what we did is we carefully took off the clay tile, salvaged it, repaired the roof structure underneath, and then reinstalled that clay tile. The clay tile, because of it being somewhat fragile material, is difficult to take off, salvage, and put on, but it really needed to do that because of the needed repairs from the water damage.
So the east step is actually the original entrance to the jail. When you walk by, you'll see up above it says County Jail. We don't use the door any longer, but the step was completely dilapidated and broken. And so they did have to tear the whole thing out and rebuild it.
The east stairs, which is the original entrance to the sheriff's residence, was deteriorating. As we got in to repair that, we found out the deterioration was deeper than we had thought, and additional reinforcement was required to ensure that the restoration that was done is going to be lasting.
It still won't be used as an entrance just because it is the historic entrance. We still have the bars in there, that it was lock only to get in and out of that. It was the booking room, the dispatch room. So it's important that the step is still there and looking the way it did originally, even though it's not used.
Visually, there was obvious points of deterioration on the exterior of the building where water had gotten behind the bricks and started to deteriorate the mortar. This required tuck pointing.
Tuck pointing is a process in which a contractor will come through, and when the mortar is deteriorated in between brick, that deteriorated mortar will be removed and then new mortar will be replaced. Part of the standards for historic preservation is that you analyze that mortar, and the replacement mortar will match the consistency of the material, the color, the hardness, and so that's a very tedious process. And tuck pointing is another term for repointing, which is the accurate term to be used.
The tuck pointing process requires the old deteriorated mortar be carefully removed and replaced with like in color and strength mortar to ensure a uniform look as well as consistent strength.
With all masonry, especially historic masonry, we need to be really careful on how we do the repairs. Masonry really uses the mortar joint as the sacrificial part of the construction. So the bricks, the stone, whatever may be a part of the masonry, that is something we want to keep intact, and we don't want that to be broken or destroyed. So we need to be really careful and understand the mortar of these masonry buildings. So for instance, on this building, we really went in to look at what are the joints that were there, how is that mortar made, and we really understand that in a very detailed way. So when we take that out, take out the damaged mortar and put new mortar in, we want to make sure it's compatible with the existing mortar, but it's also compatible with the brick, because we don't want our repairs now to cause future damage. And what we actually see is we're coming to projects that have had incompatible or inappropriate mortar put in, and those are the projects where we have to go in and rebuild large areas of the masonry. But in this project, what we really did was look at it in selective areas and say, okay, we really need to repair these mortar joints because water had come off of the roof and really eroded the mortar joint. And what we need to do is selectively repair these mortar joints so that these are the ones that are receiving the most wear. They may be the first ones that need to be repointed in the future in 20, 30 years, but the benefit of doing that and keeping that maintenance up is that then we won't have to replace those bricks, which are much harder to match and to get a source from, because if they were made 100 years ago, then we don't know if we can make them again. The size has changed, the material of what was put into that brick changed, and a lot of times to actually make new brick that may look very close to old brick, but there's always going to be some visual incompatibility, and that's always a limitation. So we really want to make sure that we take care of the mortar joints.
In 1980, when the building was remodeled into a museum, the southern portion of this building that used to house the jail cells was remodeled into a museum. And the gallery that was installed is a ramp system, and part of the ramp system would actually go through the old window openings. And so at that time in 1980, the new windows were designed in such a way to where they were blocking the visibility into that ramp structure. In working with the State Preservation Office, we worked very closely with them in terms of what kind of window had to be replaced to replicate the historic windows. And so they gave very great guidance in terms of how to make this happen. And so the new windows reflect what was originally installed in the original building.
So when the jail was converted into a museum, they gutted the entire area. And then when they put in the ramp structure, they also replaced all of the windows with windows that were not of historic character.
So the windows on this project were interesting conundrum, if you will. The historic windows on the residence are double hung windows that were these historic windows that used old growth wood that were in pretty good shape, but they did need some repair. And so as part of this process, we used what's called window rehabilitation, where you take the window carefully out and you may bring it off site. You may actually even do it on site. And what you do is you take out the glass, you repair any of the wood, you fill any holes, or maybe replace something that had been rotted. You take the old window glass, put it back in, you put new glazing putty in there, and then you put the window back in the same spot where it was in the house. But what we really were concentrating on is by repairing these windows, we can A, keep the fabric of these historic windows in place, but then B, we can also improve the thermal efficiency. It's not going to be as great as a new window, but with the repair, keeping out the drafts, and maybe repairing a storm window on the exterior, you can get as good a thermal efficiency as replacing it with a brand new window and keep the historic fabric that's already there. For the jail, the interesting conundrum that happened there was that the old jail windows, obviously with bars and all of that, was replaced when the museum was renovated. Part of the problem was the windows that they put in there with the aluminum didn't hold up in time. And that was one of the limitations of those windows, even though they were newer compared to the historic windows on the residence. So we could not fix them or retrofit them. And so we had to replace them with new windows. And the new windows that we put back there, what we tried to do was try to be a little bit more historically accurate with the configuration of the windows that were there on the jail. But we couldn't exactly match that with a brand new window, plus also the use of the window that was there, we couldn't match that exactly. So we made something that was historically appropriate, but it's not intended to exactly replicate or replace what was there historically.
As part of the original plan, a doorway on the third level was moved. When the door frame was removed, you were able to see the original shape of the door in the brickwork that was there. Our masonry contractor had the idea of salvaging that doorway, and instead of filling it with 3 layers of brick so you would not see that original opening, it was replaced with only 1 layer, and we can still showcase the original door opening in the attic space.
It was just great because it took the mason to figure that out. Everyone can have ideas of, oh, we should do it this way, but he knows the bricks and knows everything, and he said, I think we should do it this way. And everyone said, yes, do it.
Much of the existing mechanical system in the building was outdated, and some of it was not even functionable. So there was no humidity control in the building, and we had certain units that were no longer operational. This project consisted of bringing in one new large air handling unit along with 2 small furnaces and adding humidity control into the building. It also involved updating the control system, so now the heating and humidity can be controlled from our master control system that manages the entire campus. Therefore, we can address temperature and humidity controls off-site.
They can be controlled off-site, and that is also another service that Crow Wing County will bring to this historic building, is to ensure that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, this building will be conditioned in the correct way.
So when they converted the jail into a museum, we did keep 2 of the existing cells up on the 2nd floor. And when we give tours, we tell people that across, kind of symmetrical on the other side, there were 2 other jail cells. One of those areas is now a maintenance closet and has a furnace in it. And when we were cleaning things out to get ready to replace the equipment in that room, we found names that were etched into the wall, and just kind of neat that that's still there. You can see the steel mesh that the walls were made out of, and these names were probably put there by people who were in jail. Those 2 cells actually functioned as juvenile cells.
Finding something like that shows that this building has history, and it shows the value of keeping that history and securing it in this place. Preserving and restoring this building is important to our community because these walls hold the history of our communities and the functions of our local government.
Yeah, one of the great results of this project is that this building will be able to be preserved. It is preserved and it will last a lot longer. If this project would not have happened, if Crow Wing County would not have taken measures to preserve this building, there would have been significant damage to this building through water infiltration, through air infiltration. Also, the artifacts themselves were at risk because of the interior environment with mechanical systems.
Yeah, there's a few things that are left to be done, but for the most part it is finished because we've got other projects that are kind of subsequent to this one. The shelving, we still have a lot of displaced objects.
When this whole project began, they determined one of the structural problems with the building was that we had too much weight up here in the attic. So a lot of our shelving was removed, which gave us a major lack of space. Some of the old shelving is still here. This shelving is too heavy and it's not archival because of what it's made out of. So we are excited that we are going to remove all of the old shelving and get new museum quality shelving, which will give us more space up here and it will be safer for our artifacts.
We also have a new library going in, so the construction continues.
One piece of this building that hits home for me is my son came on a tour with his, I want to say 3rd grade class, and he came home so excited and bright-eyed about all the things that he was able to see in this museum. So I'm excited to know that I was part of a project that's going to continue to be here for our children as well as the adults who are interested in the history of our area.
I think it's important when a community comes together and understands what is significant about their community and how that significance is played out, whether or not it might be in traditional gatherings, whether or not it might be in buildings in their community, or whether or not it might be stories that need to be told. What that does is it provides a deeper quality of life in that community. And it's really important for them to understand that that is a foundational aspect of how a community can grow and become stronger together. And what I feel privileged in is the ability to be able to take a building like this and have this serve as one of those cornerstones of their community that somebody can bring a guest to and they can show this is the stories that have happened here. Here is the times when my kids came here and we experienced this. Oh, here is my relative who is in this picture. And what that does is it really provides them this deeper connection, but also this quality of living that can't be manufactured. It can't be just superimposed. It needs to grow out of the history of what has developed there. Sometimes these histories aren't easy. Sometimes they're difficult to talk about, but that is important to understand in all communities. We have great things, we have some difficult things, but through all of this, there is this underlying quality that is important for all of us to understand and to accentuate and to live through, and also realize that they can add that quality of life where they are right now to that community to propel that to the next generation.
I think the people who worked on this project, it seemed like it was really special to them. It was a different type of a project than they're used to, and it's not every day that you get to work on a tile roof or, historic windows, or even just working around the artifacts. I think people got to know when they walked up the ramp what was going to be there, and I think they enjoyed that. And I feel like for years to come, these people will drive by and say, "Oh, I remember when I worked in that building," and they'll have a lot of stories to share.
Be aware of the historical significance of those buildings, be aware of what impact they have in the history of your community, and then also just reach out to your local historical societies and start there.
I'm excited to see this project was able to be completed, and knowing that this building will continue to stay in place for the community to enjoy for many years.
Thank you so much for watching. Join us again on Common Ground. If you have an idea for Common Ground in North Central Minnesota, email us at legacy@lptv.org or call 218-333-3014. To watch Common Ground online, visit lptv.org and click Local Shows. To order episodes or segments of Common Ground, call 218-333-3020. Production funding of Common Ground was made possible in part by First National Bank Bemidji, continuing their second century of service to the community. Member FDIC. Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money by the vote of the people November 4th, 2008. If you watch Common Ground online, consider becoming a member or making a donation at lptv.org.